Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's discussion with members of our Forward 50. I am Jodi Rudoren, editor-in-chief of the Forward, and this year, every year, for the last 25 years, we've been compiling a list called the Forward 50 of the most interesting or important or influential American Jews. And this year, we decided to do an experiment of bringing them together for a series of weekly discussions about whatever is on their mind. Today, we have three members of the Forward 50, Rabbi Michael Beals, Deborah Cornavaca, and Maayan Zik. If you came specifically to see Rabbi B'nai Lappi, I'm sorry to say she's a little under the weather. She's going to come back for another event, but I promise that these three panelists are going to be incredibly exciting. I want to also say that we had a little bit of a mishap where Rabbi Beals accidentally sent his panelist link out to a bunch of friends. If you have come in through the panelist link and you are not Rabbi Michael Beals, we'll ask you to sign on to the regular link, which we're posting in the chat, and you'll come back for that. We are, before we get started, I want to just give everyone a chance. People are still rolling in. I want to just a couple of tachlis notes. One is that we are broadcasting live on our Facebook page, or will be very soon, at Jewish Daily Forward. We encourage you to share that link with your own social media followers. And we are recording this webinar and will be distributing the video to all of you and to anybody who registered but couldn't make it in the end by email in the next day or so. You also will get in that email a special discount offer for subscriptions to the Forward, and we hope you will continue to come to our events and to read our journalism. Because we have a rabbi with us, I'm going to ask that we start with a mini Dvar Torah. Rabbi Beals is going to share a few words of Torah to set the stage for us, and then we'll do some introductions of our panel and start the conversation. So, Rabbi Beals.
Thank you, Jodi. First, our rabbi in few words. It's like an oxymoron, but I'll do my best. So this week's Torah portion is Teruma, and it is the last 5 parshiot in the book of Shemot or Exodus, and it deals with the planning and then the execution of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the portable shul in the desert. I love this Torah portion, and it's so perfect for us all for today because it really deals with inclusion. It starts off, of course, with the word truma, and within the truma you have the root ramah, which means to lift up. And the conservative Jewish camps in the summer are called Camp Ramah, which is great. So Ramah means to raise up. So the giver becomes the receiver, and the receiver becomes the giver. It's a palindrome, which is my favorite Monty Python word. Nun, taf, nun. The giver becomes the receiver, and the receiver becomes the giver, which is cool. But the part that I really like for us today is that when Moshe Rabbeinu opens this all up, this project, he says everybody should give whose heart so moves them, and that they can give whatever they want. They can give gold, that's not bad, zahav, or silver, kesef, or nechoshet, bronze, or they can give yarn, right? Or maybe they're not going to give anything at all physical. Maybe they're going to give their ability to sew, or the ability to be a carpenter. But what Moshe Rabbeinu does, by the way he sets the terms, he makes this a really inclusive, wide project so everybody can be a part of it. And all of their diversity is important because if everybody brings gold, you're not going to have a mishkan. If everybody brings yarn, you're not going to have a mishkan. If everybody can only sew but they can't be a carpenter, you need it all together. And what I've really been enjoying about looking at these Forward 50 seminars is that there's so much diversity. It's so delicious. It's like the best cholent ever. And I would argue that maybe for all of us in our organizations, that if we can try to raise up diversity and appreciation, we can create better corporate cultures, better synagogue cultures, better school cultures. And I dare say, if we want to heal the United States of America, and if we want to heal the Jewish community, that the more inclusive we are and the more we appreciate differences and welcome them in, I think the more we're going to be able to do refuah or real healing. And I think the Forward is modeling that beautifully with these interesting and unexpected conversations. So Darabah, enjoy.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Beals. That is a great table setting, and I'm loving seeing in the chat already where we have people calling in from. A lot of diversity there, people in Silver Spring, Maryland, and Ankara, Turkey, and many people related to Rabbi Beals, Austin, Texas, British,
England, yes.
the United Kingdom, and that is totally great. So I'm gonna just for those who are just joining us, I'm Jodi Rudoren, editor-in-chief of the Forward, and I'm gonna start with some brief introductions of our panelists and then get right into the conversation. So Rabbi Beals, who already started us off, is the rabbi at Congregation Beth Shalom. He's been there since 2004. He is a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary. And he is, Congregation Beth Shalom is in Wilmington, Delaware, where he lives with his wife, who's director of veterinary medicine. And as many of you know, Rabbi Beals has become known as Joe's rabbi because of a close encounter he had with President Biden many years ago. And we'll ask him to talk a little bit about that soon. Next, we have Maayan Zik. Zik? How do you say it? Zik, sorry, who is an Orthodox Jewish Jamaican American living in Brooklyn. She's a social activist who co-organized the Tahalucha for Social Justice, which called on Orthodox and Chabad Jews in Crown Heights to march against police violence back in June after the killing of George Floyd. She has since co-founded organizations including Care Avelt and Kamocha, which are furthering her work in social justice and racial equality. She's been featured in the Forward, obviously, but also Vogue, the Washington Post, the Jewish Press, and she lives with her husband and 4 children in Crown Heights, a place where Jews and African Americans have had a very interesting arc of relations over the years, and I'm really interested to hear Maayan's perspective on the issue of Black Lives Matter and how the community has been dealing with coronavirus and many other things. And finally, we have Deborah Cornavaca, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Outreach for Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. Deborah is a longtime activist and organizer who has worked both on political campaigns and kind of community coalition building and educational campaigns, so issue-based and elections. She worked for a long time at the New Jersey Education Association, and she has been a key point person for Governor Murphy on dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, and particularly on outreach with the Jewish communities in the Orthodox community in New Jersey. And there are many people have written about and talked about the ways in which New Jersey handled some of the issues around Orthodox Jews and the coronavirus much better than neighbors in New York. So we'll get into that as well. As you know, we were intending to have a 4th panelist, Rabbi B'nai Lappi, who can't join us today because she's a little under the weather, but we hope we'll bring her back in another event. But we're lucky enough that Rabbi Beals has a kind of personal connection to Rabbi Lappi. So just in her honor, he's going to share a quick story about that, about their connection.
So I wouldn't be a rabbi if it wasn't for Rabbi B'nai Lappi. When I first began rabbinical school at what's now called the American Jewish University, but formerly the University of Judaism in Los Angeles, 1990-91, for Mechina year, the first year, we have to learn Talmud. And I drowned in the sea of Talmud. It just wasn't what I was used to. And I was doing very poorly. And financial aid was connected to GPA. And it looked like my rabbinical experience wasn't going to go very far. So I turned to B'nai. And B'nai went ahead and, free of charge, tutored me, my classmate, tutored me on many, many weekdays in her garret in West LA. And she just spoon-fed me Talmud. And she had the best pedagogy. It was brilliant. She'd been an ESL teacher in Japan first. And so that final exam, I got an A because of her. And it just launched me forward. Now, here's the piece I want to share, because she's the Rosh Yeshiva of Savara now, which is a yeshiva especially for LGBTQ students. And her pedagogy is so fabulous. And here's the last piece. I'm old. When I was in the RA and the JTS, if you were outwardly gay, you couldn't be ordained as a rabbi, nor could we do gay marriages. And so I had several closeted gay students, and I didn't know. And one of them was B'nai, and B'nai actually came out the day after ordination. And what a horrible thing to have to live with, not to be true to who you are openly, because she wouldn't have been able to continue as a rabbi. And we would have all been suffered a loss. Here's the piece. Because of that friendship with her and that relationship, when we got to discuss openly the gay decisions of the RA and the JTS in terms of openness, I didn't have to work to get there. I was already there because my relationship and loyalty to B'nai made it a very human experience. And I think that there's something to be said for that in terms of our other discussions about what does relationship building look like in terms of moving not just us, but other people from here to there. And in terms of cures for what's uh, hurting our country and hurting our Jewish community today, we don't have enough relationships and we don't know the other very well. And B'nai taught me very early on that by being friends and really owing so much to her, I was able to be an ally, an advocate for other people who are LGBTQ, not because I'm liberal, but because I had a friend, a real living, breathing friend who changed my life. So that's my salute to B'nai Lappy.
Thank you for that. Maayan, I'm going to turn to you in a second to pick up on some of the issues of identity, but I just want to do one more bit of tachlis for people. I love that you're chatting using the chat, and you should use the chat if you have something you want to say to everybody, a comment on what's being said or a link to share. If you would like to raise a question for one of the panelists, for me to ask the panelists, please use the Q&A button. You'll find both the chat and Q&A buttons. I think everybody knows this by now. The bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, on the left if you're on a phone or tablet. And once again, you will get a recording of this conversation in your email. So Maayan, Rabbi Beals was just talking really interestingly about the ways that our different identities really inform our inquiry about Talmud or our activism, and the way that broadening our understanding of identity can help people interrelate. Your very bio, your identity is at the core of what so much of what happened in 2020. Living in a part of Brooklyn that was hit particularly hard by the virus and by coronavirus restrictions, and then of course when the Black Lives Matter movement grew and erupted after the killing of George Floyd, and you got right into it and tried to connect to parts of your identity to parts of your community. And I just want you to talk a little bit about that, the year, and what that was like for you, and how identity and politics and community kind of played together in your world.
Well, first of all, regarding the coronavirus, I think like any other parent has had to experience of going into the Zoom world. So mostly consumed with that, having 4 children on 4 different Zooms, that's a lot. And especially when they're Zoom resistant, that's a whole other story. But in any case, yeah, focusing on that a lot, but then also having the George Floyd situation happen. And I believe, I always describe it like holidays like this, or holidays in Shabbos, like at least to like the secular or non-Jewish parts of my family. It's like going into a holiday, disappearing for a little while, and then coming back or getting out of it again. So we went into Shavuos, and then we came back out. And of course, while you're in that holiday bubble, you have no idea what's going on in the outside world. It's really just about your family, your friends if they come over, etc., etc. So we came out of, my group of friends and I came out of this bubble to the shocking news of George Floyd, and really, felt disturbed about the kinds of conversations that were happening around this thing, where the focus of it was completely off. Instead of focusing on the loss of life, we're focusing on, well, hold on, well, they're looting, and people are looting, and they're stealing from businesses, and that's not the focus. That's not the thing. So in any case, so we decided to do Toluca for social justice, to give everyone a safe space to say, this protest, we're not having any of those shenanigans. No, but in any case, yeah, we're not having those shenanigans. This is a safe space to promote your voice, because of course there are lots of people who kind of sit on the sides and they don't know what to say or how to say it. And if they're going to be attacked, I don't want to be attacked. But in any case, they don't, so they kind of lurk. So we also wanted to give those people the space to come up and feel safe, and safe in a community that agrees that we should be talking about, we should be defending all lives, and specifically talking about the issues of the Black, um, and of racism in the country, and violence towards Black people, et cetera, et cetera. And also a reminder that our protest was also a reminder that Torah discusses all of these things. Torah is for justice all the time. Every single moment it can talk about it. It's like justice, justice, justice. Slapping us over the head with justice. So, it's like, hello. So it's there, and it's not just 613 mitzvot for us. It's there in the 7 Noahide laws as well. So it's for everyone to champion. So that's really where we're going with that. And since then, I've just been going with that, and trying to find ways to connect in our community and to create meaningful spaces. With Kamocha, we're doing like affinity spaces, but in any case, I think I talk a lot, so I'm going to hand it to you.
I'm going to definitely come back to you to talk about the particular challenge of doing anti-racism work within the Orthodox community, and also the particular challenge of being a mom and an activist. But I want to just give everyone a couple minutes to sort of read us into their year. So Deborah, talk to us a little bit about, you've been very much on the front line of really working on pandemic policy, and you've had kind of a front row seat to the pandemic management by a senior politician. And I'd love you to share what you think made things work to the extent they did in terms of particularly around New Jersey's handling of the virus with the Jewish community, or talk us to a little bit about what your kind of 2020 experience, the highs and lows. Give us a 2-minute version of that.
Sure. And first, thank you, Jodi. I want to thank you for this invitation today, but mostly just for the tremendous honor of being amongst so many incredible people. To tell you it was a surprise is an understatement. To tell you that I'm humbled and honored is also an understatement. So thank you for the opportunity and the recognition.
You're welcome. Actually, I forgot to say this, but I should say that you were one of the dozen or more people who were nominated by our readers. We always include a reader nomination component, which helps us get beyond our bubble of what we've already covered. And you were one of the people, and it was a contributing writer who wrote a very eloquent letter of nomination for you. But I didn't know about you before, and I was really glad to sort of meet you through the nomination process. So
thank you. Well, and as a community organizer, I can only tell you that is the most blessed way to be recognized, is from the community. So thank you for that as well. I think, what to the extent that we've had our successes in New Jersey through this really terrible tragedy, it's been because of the value system that this governor came to at the outset before the pandemic, which is that he really truly believes we do our best work when we do it together, when everybody has a seat at the table, and that when we do it with our partners, not to our partners. And it's very hard to do things to someone and have them be a partner. I always say that you can have a partner or you can have a judge. And this is a governor who believes very strongly in partnership. So, the recognition just of the position that I have that exists in his office speaks to that commitment, because I'm really there to build these relationships and make sure that we are building them on trust and mutual respect, that amongst our diversity, we recognize that there's a difference between equity and equality, so that we're not treating everybody the same way to get to the same goal. We have to recognize the differences and adjust. And so, there are many points along the way where just talking about Zoom school or signing up for a vaccine or a test on a smartphone, if those phones aren't prevalent or the internet isn't prevalent in a community, we have to say, what do we need to do to adjust? Not too bad, you should get the internet, because that is not respectful, right? Or a recognition, frankly, as organizers say, you have to begin with where you're at, not where you wish you would be. And so you have to begin with that reality. And then you have to build a system that works. And so I think that our success, particularly, speaking around the Jewish community in New Jersey, has been that trust that the governor has extended since early on, that he's, allowed me the chance to build on. and that pre-existed the pandemic, but that during the pandemic, what we understood and we always kept in mind was we shared the same goals, but we had to listen to each other about the different strategies and tactics to get us to that goal. And so while some may say closing down a shul or closing down schools is safer, if the recognition is that doesn't work within a community, then let's have a realistic discussion about what will work. Let's have testing in schools, or let's move our shuls outside, or let's make the adjustments and do that out in the open, transparently and honestly with each other, so we can build a system that achieves success together. And I believe it's that trust and that respect and that fact that this governor believes everybody has a seat at the table that allowed us to get through tremendously difficult times and come out on the other side stronger than when we started.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. Rabbi Beals, I'm going to turn to you now. You know, a lot of people have probably heard the story about how you first met Joe Biden many years ago when you were presiding at a shiva in an apartment basement, I think a laundry room. And I've posted a forward story about this in the chat. And shows up Senator Biden out of nowhere. You're kind of shocked to see him. You ask him what he's doing there. And he says that the woman who had died, an elderly woman, had given him, I think, $18 for his first campaign for Senate many years before, and in every campaign. And that you were very touched by his showing up. He showed up without an entourage, very plain spoken, and, you know, really seemed to make that connection about what's important in life, you know, the showing up to the shiva. What's interesting, as I was thinking about your year, and it's like, here's this thing that happened to you a million years ago and was probably kind of a great like party, you know, dinner party conversation piece for a while. Suddenly the guy's running for president and then elected president, and every journalist in America wants to hear this story. And then suddenly you're speaking, you're doing a video at the Democratic National Convention. And I guess I just wonder what that's like to be kind of, first of all, you're in the middle of, for everybody in the world, 2020 was a really challenging year. And I'm sure you're going through whatever with your community, like many other rabbis. And then suddenly this thing happens that is kind of has nothing to do with you, but gives you this like new spotlight and this new nickname and this new role. And how does that feel? What do you do with it? How did that affect your 2020?
So thank you again for this honor as well. And I love being with Deborah and Maayan and getting to know new friends. And Jodi, I love the Jewish Forward. It's been a touchstone periodical for me for years. It's so well done and so accessible. It's odd. I have to be very careful to put the brakes on it. I'm not Joe Biden's advisor. I'm not qualified to opine on political events and affairs and give him advice because he doesn't call. I feel like he's a Jewish mother. He doesn't call. People will call who represent him, asking me to do things. Like in the past, I represented the Jewish community at his son's levaya, his son's funeral, which was a really heavy place. I've been at high holiday parties. He's thrown as vice president. He pops up at our synagogue for funerals or for B'nai Mitzvah parties, and he's just so accessible. So I wanted to be really careful about this new bima, this new pulpit that I'm on, and I want to make sure that I talk about things I'm qualified to talk about, which is Yahadut, is Judaism. And listen, as Maayan knows and as Deborah knows and Jodi, surely as you know, Judaism has so much to say about things, and had a great education in the Jewish Theological Seminary of America along with B'nai. So there's plenty to say, and a rabbi is supposed to teach. So I actually look at these as all as teachable moments. And I think Judaism, although I don't believe that Judaism is superior to other religions, I think Judaism has a unique thing to say about everything. And there's nothing that Judaism isn't relevant about. There's nothing that the Torah portion of the week can't talk about. So I've tried to use these opportunities not to further my own agenda, but to further Judaism's agenda. And in this last year of 2020, our synagogue has grown during the pandemic, and I never expected that. But we've created so many bridges technologically that we never expected. So we have congregants who moved to Florida who changed congregate, and now they've come back to us because having a bar mitzvah on Zoom doesn't matter where you are. So we've taken in more congregants and reached out to more people. I've been doing conversions to Judaism. It's been really vibrant and exciting. And I dare say, had COVID not happened, which has been an unglück, a terrible tragedy for our people, but I don't think I would have necessarily gotten this type of spotlight because everybody's had to change how to communicate. And so I fill the gap sometimes, and I can put color into a picture where the color wasn't there. So, when a door closes, a window opens. I saw Sound of Music. I'm sure you did too. So, so I try to go ahead and make the most of these moments, but more for Judaism than for myself.
That's great. Thank you. Maayan, I want to return to you to sort of follow up on some of what you said before. And I guess I'll start with the particular challenges that you faced organizing for the Black Lives Matter movement in the Orthodox community. We wrote and I read many stories, and it happened. It's not just that you were in Crown Heights with the fraught history between Blacks and Jewish relations that neighborhood evokes for a lot of us, but also it happened at this time in which on at least two fronts, kind of concern about anti-Semitism was incredibly high. There was this, 2019, in which there'd been all these incidents, violent incidents and hate speech incidents. And then there was like a lot of concern last spring around the idea that Orthodox Jews were being kind of targeted on social media and otherwise around coronavirus, that whether that be total disinformation rumors that Jews started the virus, created the virus, blah, blah, or then crackdowns on large gatherings in your community and other communities in Brooklyn and New Jersey. And so here comes the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of the things that we heard from some Orthodox quarters was like, what about us? What about, how can we be active in the anti-racism movement when we're being targeted as Jews? And I just wonder how that played out for you living at that intersection and trying to organize in that community around that issue.
Well, definitely regarding anti-Semitism, I am concerned about it all the time. I'm not like, if you were to ask me like, well, why now? Why didn't you start up like way back when all of this was happening? I can't really answer that question, but for whatever it was, maybe it was the culmination of friends, like the friends getting together and doing this thing. In regards to organizing the Black Lives Matter thing, it was really just like what we were talking about in our group of friends. Like I refer to these friends a lot. Okay. But in whichever circle of friends, it's like, I think we'd kind of, to some extent, we've kind of bubbled ourselves off from the main community of even within like Crown Heights, like I sometimes say that my experience is a highly curated one at the moment, because it's like I choose the people who are around me. So, this is what we happen to be talking about at the moment. And of course, I actually had a friend who was attacked by a Black woman in an anti-Semitic attack, and there was an arrest for it. And I think this was around the time that they were doing, they changed the rules about the bail, about bailouts for bail bonds for
bail reform.
Bail reform. So in any case, so she was attacked, but, even her talking to us about it, and I think she was probably interviewed a few times, et cetera, even her just talking about it from her perspective, she was like, I think that it really, this woman's state of mind was really something it was something of concern for her. She thought that she was perhaps, not in her right mind, which is probably what led her to do whatever actions she did. And I'm not saying that every single person who attacks a Jewish person is like, oh, well, they're just mentally unstable, and that's the excuse to kind of put it in a corner and whatever. But no, but I think because she was talking about it and perhaps things were already happening around her, maybe we didn't mobilize as strongly as we did in terms of the Black Lives Matter thing. And I think we also, one of our friends had been in quarantine and she'd wanted to go to protest a lot. She's like, I just need to go to a protest, but there weren't any protests that day. So we're like, okay, we'll just make one. We'll just make a protest. And literally it was like, well, we had our protest on Sunday and we started planning on Thursday, like Thursday afternoon. So there wasn't really, it was just like, all right, get your signs, everyone, meet at this location, let's go. And yeah, so I handed it back over to you.
I love that. I mean, I was thinking when you were first talking about your 4 kids and the, basic challenge of 4 kids in Zoom school. And I'm thinking it would have been very easy to be like, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I can't do this now, even if it's important, even if I want to. But I love that you're just like, okay, let's have a protest. And I think, I'm sure Deborah is an organizer for, like, maybe this is just the working mom in me coming out, but we all have struggled a little bit in 2020 to just think like, is this just too much to take? And yet there's been so much need, right? And it's like, how do you balance the sort of just everybody's individual capacity with the need, with the opportunities that are there? I don't know.
It's also possibly the opportunity to go out and see friends you haven't seen in forever and a day. Just, oh my gosh, okay, yes, we will definitely meet up this Sunday. During the week, it would never happen. On a Sunday, for sure, it could, we can work things out there. And, the husband's available, it's all good there. So yeah, no, so yeah, I give it back to you now.
Deborah, if you want to address that kind of capacity issue, I'd be happy to hear it, but I'm also interested in maybe your perspective on this question of how kind of the anti-Semitism has played out in connection with the pandemic, and a lot of Orthodox Jews feeling quite besieged and put upon and singled out for criticism, and how you've dealt with those concerns in New Jersey seemingly somewhat more effectively than has happened next door.
Well, so I mean, as a working mom, I'll say yes. This has been relentless. And there's never been a greater time of like people having such urgent needs, right? When, you're involved in everything from the testing and tracing around COVID to respecting burial traditions, and having to try to make this right for people who are suffering is a lot. But the one thing that I think we're unequivocal about is being intolerant of intolerance, if I can put it that way. We're very clear on that. So there is no point at which it's acceptable to us to see our state elevate hate, anti-Semitism, to be racist, to be Islamophobic. There is not room in what we hold to be high standards of values and ethics in our state for that. And what we do is we call it out directly. We're not afraid to name it, and we're not afraid to say that we reject it and that we will stand with the Jewish community if, as a result of us putting resources into addressing, an outbreak in a Jewish community, people want to use that as an excuse to articulate anti-Semitism. Not only will we persist in our investment, but we will defend vigorously that decision, and we will stand with the Jewish community. And we will say, no, we're not going to tolerate it. And we have to be relentless in that. So, when things were bad in Ocean County, the governor went to Ocean County and we held a briefing outdoors there, surrounded by the rabbis and mayors and other community leaders, to say, we're standing here in solidarity with you and we want people to see that. And I think that helps to build trust, and it helps to set a standard across the state. And it's more important than ever because, of course, while we were going through this pandemic, we were also going through such a tumultuous time politically over, yes, George Floyd's murder, but also who we had in the federal government who was breeding and facilitating hate and elevating it. So, I think we felt it incumbent upon us to be twice as strong and twice as articulate about it.
Thank you. Since you brought up the prior president, I will turn to the news of last week anyway, or this weekend, where the Senate, of course, voted for the second time not to convict President Trump at his second impeachment trial. We knew that the outcome of that trial was pretty much a foregone conclusion, but I'm wondering for each of you, what surprised you about last week's trial, about the experience of watching it? What are your takeaways? What do you think should happen next? What is on your minds around impeachment? And I'll give each of you a quick take on it. Looks like Deborah, will you start?
Sure. I think one of the things that surprised me is that people were surprised by what happened on January 6th. It had been, we couldn't say, it's like watching a train wreck. You can't say exactly when it's going to happen, but it's coming. And so in some ways it was inevitable, and it was such a sadness because of that. I think that my takeaway is that what we need more than anything as a nation is healing. And we need to be respectful and listen to each other's differences and voices, and understand that even if I find some viewpoints and vantage points repugnant and morally offensive, I have to find a way not to respond with equal hate, and which is why I say we're intolerant of intolerance somewhat, jokingly, because one has to also find a way to be tolerant, to listen, and then to respond in a way that helps us progress together and not create deeper divisions. And that's just my takeaway, is that we desperately need that as a nation, and it's terrifically hard work. But I know from my years in Akiva Schechter School, and those difficult dialogues are where love lives. It's where acceptance lives. It's where learning and progress live. And I feel I feel a responsibility to be part of that, right? So it'd be very easy for me to be angry, but I just don't feel like there's place for that right now in this nation. There's too much of that, and we have to heal.
Rabbi Beals, any takeaways from the impeachment vote?
Well, there were some real personal stories. Representative Jamie Raskin touched me to my very heart. There are congregants who are openly saying that maybe he needs to replace me as rabbi at Beth Shalom. They're not upset with me, but he was like a rabbi's rabbi. He was such a good teacher and really reflected the very best of Jewish values. And knowing that he lost his son so recently to suicide, and he was still there, was just such a powerful moment. And I think that it humanized the experience, and humanizing the suffering that the Congress people went through, and the fear, and raising up stories like Vice President Michael Pence's story. I always look for those stories, back to my story about B'nai Lappi being my gateway into being more of an advocate for LGBTQ. I think it's important to create relationships. It's important to humanize people. I think it's important to remember that we're all made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and to echo Deborah, who I really enjoyed listening to a lot. Who is wise? People who learn from other people. So Deborah, like I'm taking like notes inside. But I think those relationships are so important to create humanity. And so I wasn't surprised. A lot of people ask, what's the value of this? And that was a really good question, if we knew what was going to happen. So in Devarim, Kaf Aleph, it talks about the quarrelsome, the rebellious child, the rebellious son. And what do you do with a rebellious son? And most of the rabbinic commentators say there was never such a thing as a rebellious son. There was never a son that was killed by stoning. So then the question, why is the story like that in there? It's to serve as a warning, so that we'll see how important the Jewish community, or how important God feels is this type of behavior. So I think that since the Torah talks about the importance of warning as a deterrence, I think that's perhaps the value. But now that we've had this experience, I'm so eager to move forward and deal with what are the needs of our community, and not do Lashon Hara against the past president, because I think it brings everybody down. It brings the negativity up. And I think that if we're going to get through these problems, starting with COVID-19 and the environment and the immigration issue and the social justice issues, we need as much positivity as possible, as much bridge building as possible, and bringing people together. And I think that making people feel defensive, especially if they voted for the other candidate in the last election, it's one step forward for every 2 steps forward. And I think that we can't afford to have a drag right now for where our country is at. So I'm very, very eager for bipartisan support across religion, culture, race, gender. I don't want to sweep injustice under the carpet, but I don't want to get caught in Narishkeit.
Yeah. Maayan, how about you? How did you experience this second impeachment trial? Was there any big takeaways for you, or?
For me, I thought it was, so for me, I always think about like, well, how do we say to children, like, how do we present this to children? You know, like, so we're teaching the children like, okay, well, this is how you solve conflicts. Like, we don't hit each other. We're not violent to each other. You know, these are the things, and it's not okay to do that. But then we get to this level of government. It's supposed to be the highest level of government in our land, in the country, et cetera, possibly the world at some points in time. But in any case, then we get there and they condone the violence and say, well, you know, no one's at, you know, he's not at fault for this, acquit. So I just, for me, it's just like, okay, well, that's not the greatest example. It's like, you know, it's like you're saying to children, like, well, when you grow up, you can throw all those rules right out the door and do whatever you want. And so I think that for me, like, the lesson is that we all have to just step up. We all have to step up to have more integrity, to just be the people who are telling our children to be, you know, think about those things. I know it sounds very black and white, but yeah, we should be those people that we're teaching our children to be.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna, we have one question in the Q&A. I'm going to ask people, if you have a question you'd like me to ask the panelists, please put it in the Q&A, not in the chat. And I'm going to encourage you to do that. We have about 15 minutes left. There's one question from already here from Leonard J. Pepper. I'm just going to read it. I'm not quite sure what the question really means, but I'm interested in how you all answer it and what you think it means. Leonard says, can we really have social justice when some victims behave badly? Again, I'm not quite sure what he's referring to, but I wonder how you guys take that. Deborah, you want to start? Or Maayan, either one?
Okay, sure. I take it to mean that, you know, for in terms of George Floyd, they were saying that he was a violent criminal and things like that. So how, or, you know, or even just speaking about criminals at large, like, how can we have social justice? Like, do they deserve social justice too if they're being violent towards the greater community? That's how I interpret that question.
And what's your answer?
My answer is that at some point, some base part of me who wants to be like, yeah, nail all the criminals to the wall kind of thing. But at the same, that's a very basic lizard mind type thing going on there. But but the higher part of me is like, you know, we have, if we're gonna have this level, you know, there's a level that we're at, and I think in terms of, okay, so in terms of like where we're going as a society and all that jazz or whatever, if you were thinking about Mashiach times, let's say, I think I interpret Mashiach times to be a very peaceful time. Everyone's, you know, everyone's inclusive of each other, everyone's loving of each other. There's no conflict. If there is conflict, we know how to peacefully solve that. So I think at this point in time, there has to be a level at which we say, okay, regardless of the way this person behaved, we have to, this is the standard, this is our behavior, this is our standard, this is how we behave towards all the people. And so that's where I think, yeah, social justice does fit towards those people, even if they are violent people, and even if they become victims of crimes themselves.
And what do you think, Deborah? Can we really have social justice when some victims behave badly?
So I think the first part of my answer is that social justice is a journey, not a destination, or it's a marathon and not a sprint. I'm not sure what the right way of putting it is. So I think you can always strive towards achieving social justice and improving upon it, even when not everybody is in the same place. I think with respect to the way people behave, there are, I think is well put, fundamental pieces of human dignity that we should all be respecting in this, and we should all give to each other, and that is a necessary part of our humanity to achieve social justice. If other people don't live up to the standard that we believe is the one that we should achieve, I don't think that means that we back down or give away, but we try to lift them up and bring them to a better place. And I think that's what the work that's incumbent upon us to achieve social justice in a greater capacity that more people feel. And in doing so, I think in that journey, you do lift more people up to a better place.
Rabbi Beals, you want to pick up on that?
Yes, I always turn to the Torah. In last week's Torah portion, Mishpatim, it said we have to treat the widow, the orphan, and the stranger with great respect because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. I didn't see, to your question, I didn't say, but what if the widow is badly behaved or the orphan is badly behaved or the stranger is badly behaved? Then we go ahead and we don't treat them with justice. We don't treat them kindly. It seems to me, I beg to differ with the question because the emphasis is on the person who's acting poorly. And I think that as a Jew, as a Torah true Jew, I think that the emphasis needs to be on the society itself, not on the individual bad actors, but how's the society in general treating these people? And a friend of ours named Maayan said a little while ago, Tzedek Tir Dov screams the Torah, justice, justice thou shalt pursue. And it's a klal statement, it's a general statement. It's not in the specifics of, but what if this individual is acting poorly? And I think that for people who are enemies of a just society, they'll look at the looters and they'll look at the robbers in a protest, which is abominable, these people, and they need to be punished, as Maayan said. But I think that we have to look at the bigger issue, what created the protests in the first place? And I think that it depends where you want to put the dagesh. Where do you want to put the emphasis? Do you want to put it on the bad actors, or do you want to put it on the society that we hope to improve? And I don't know about you, but I'm for improving society. And so that's where I want to put my energy. While certainly if people violate the law, people built their stores being destroyed. I mean, there are bad actors in organizations. They need to be dealt with according to the laws of the land. But I think we can't get sidetracked. Well, what was the bigger issue? Why were we protesting in the first place? What started? And I'm afraid that the media, sometimes, not the forward, of course, but the media goes for the, it's kind of like having the focus of a squirrel, right? Just in this moment. But I think if we're going to make social change, especially according to Jewish values, we have to look at the bigger picture at all times.
Great. I'm going to stick with you, Rabbi Beals, for a totally different question from David Geffen, who asks, and I'm going to ask anybody who wants to weigh in after, but I'm going to start with Rabbi Beals because I feel like this is a question rabbis get a lot. Do you judge Israel and what that country does in the same way you judge what happens in the USA?
Oy, gewalt. Well, Rabbi David Geffen lives in Israel, and he made Aliyah from Wilmington to Jerusalem. So he's definitely a little biased, in a good way, of course. So Zionism is tricky because Zionism has two pieces. One is we need to have a life preserver called Israel, that for 2,000 years, the Jewish people got a raw deal by Christian Europe. And now we need a home of our own. Maybe the Holocaust wouldn't have happened had we had a state of Israel. It's a real survivalism, a nationalism, and it can get really angry at times. And I get it. And that's an important part of Zionism, but it's not the end of the story. Zionism is a great continuing Jewish experiment of our people, not just in the land of Israel, but here in the US and everywhere as well. And those values are the values we've been talking about during this whole Zoom conversation about tzedek tir dov and about racial equality, et cetera. And it seems to me that we will be failing in our mission as Jews if we didn't hold Israel up to be an Or Goyim, a light unto the nations. That's the struggle for Israel. How is Israel both a nation like any other nation, which was part of what we wanted for Zionism? We Jews want to just be treated normally, plus Jewish exceptionalism in the state of Israel. Look how fast they got the COVID-19 vaccination out to their people. Look how they have this pill cam that you swallow it and can see inside of you. Maybe we'll never have to have those nasty colonoscopies again because they're so disgusting hard. Yay, Israel. So we're constantly struggling. And if we critique Israel, then our friends who are center right might say we're enemies of Israel, or we should have that conversation in private. So it's a to Rabbi Geffen's issue is a constant struggle. And to answer this simply is difficult. I'll only say this: there only is one Jewish nation, one Jewish country. There's no others. If that one is allowed to sink, there's no replacement for it. And so as Jews, we're called upon not to support every single policy of the state of Israel, but to be as supportive of Israel as we possibly can. And if we see in a controversial issue that there's another way of looking at the situation that the press hasn't covered, I think we can't wait for Israel to explain herself. I think we as educated Jews, especially we Jews who read the Jewish Forward and are very educated, need to go ahead and say, what about this side of the conversation too? And I think that that is a responsibility of every Jew on the Zoom call, is to say, what can I do to explain that part of Israel that's missing in the conversation?
Maayan, I see, are you leaning in because you want to jump in on this question? No? Deborah, you have anything to add on this? How do you judge Israel the same as you judge the US?
I mean, I think if we're talking about personal values, then I would say absolutely, because if one holds values true, they can't be selectively applied. But I would also say that in both of the way that I would judge, and I put judge very judiciously, Israel or the United States, it's with empathy for all parts of the conflicts and the tensions. And to the rabbi's point, it's with recognition of the uniqueness of Israel and also in many ways of the United States for its democracy. And so the goal isn't to be judgmental. For me, the goal is to understand and work towards building a better future.
I love that. I think also implicit in
Jodi, I'd also add that Israel's a very young nation. I mean, where were we 70 plus years as a country? We were in a mess. If you look at all of our social justice issues, 70 years ago, from Native Americans to African Americans, we were a disaster. By that yardstick, Israel is light years away. I mean, we're in the world of Star Trek utopia when it comes to where Israel is versus where the United States was at the same time. It doesn't mean Israel can't be better, but in context, Israel's not exactly in the best neighborhood in the world. And so to judge Israel exactly as we judge the United States, the US is surrounded by friendly nations on either side. Israel is in a very, very sticky wicket. The Abraham Accord has made it a little bit of a better neighborhood. So, give credit where credit is due to President Trump. It didn't happen. I hope we'll build on it. But I think that we have to be careful, because it's not apples to apples and oranges to oranges. They're both democracies, but one has an ocean on both sides, Pacific and the Atlantic, and Israel doesn't have those luxuries. And I get a little upset sometimes by the simplistic parallelisms between, well, if we could do it here in the US, they could do it there in Israel too.
Yeah, I think one other aspect of this question, which I'll just throw out there and then move on, but it's just also the question of what right we have as Jews, but who aren't residents of Israel, to criticize it, and what rights Israelis have to criticize. It's like you have, when you're a citizen of somewhere and you're participating in that society, you have a particular angle on judging the government and the leadership. And there's a little bit, although I think we all do have connections to Israel and a stake in Israel's future, the way we might engage with that should be different as Americans versus if we were Israelis, as if we made Aliyah like David Geffen. So
Jodi, I think I disagree with you, no offense, but
okay.
I think that as a Zionist, I believe that Israel is the great experiment of the entire Jewish people, whether they live ba'aretz or not. In the end, Israel will have to decide for herself what foreign relations, what defense policies, etc. But I think it's a very old, stale argument to say because we lived in Jews in the United States, we shouldn't open up our mouth and speak up when we think that there's something that should be changed.
No, I agree with you about that too. I think, we are all connected to Israel. We have a stake in it, but it's not the same as if you live there and vote there. I think there's some differences there. That's all.
And if I could just say, Jodi, to that too, it is always easier to criticize than to offer a solution. And I've never experienced the reality of that more than working in government, because people come and with complaints and legitimate complaints, but your responsibility is solely to help find solutions. And so I do think that it's a responsibility of us, those of us who criticize, whether it's our nation state or Israel, to offer to be part of the solution. That's, to me, the biggest piece of it.
Mea hus, 100%.
So we've got about 4 minutes left, and I'm going to ask a question I've been asking at each of these events. And I'm happy to have people post in the chat generally their own answer to this question. I think, there was an interesting kind of silver linings op-ed in the New York Times, and I've spent a lot of the last year thinking about some of the silver linings of the pandemic. Rabbi Beals talked about one at the beginning. His congregation is actually growing. And I guess I'd ask you, and you can answer this on a personal or professional level, but to tell us about just about one thing that has come to your life because of the pandemic, the lockdown, the changes in the way we do our daily business that you really want to hold on to. One thing that you didn't necessarily choose, kind of happened to you because of the pandemic, but that you hope that when we get back to normal, whatever that looks like, when we're all vaccinated, when we're all back to the office or whatever that is, what are you going to try to keep from your 2020 existence for as long as you can? Again, in your personal life, your family life, your work life, your community life, whatever it is. Rabbi Beals, you want to go first because you were nodding so vigorously?
Sure, yeah. So one of the big changes that I've seen here in the state of Delaware is this real cooperative spirit between our government, led by our governor, John Carney, and our lieutenant governor, Bethany Hall Long. And we've been working with the Delaware Council of Faith-Based Partnerships, which is our first state interfaith group, which I'm the chairman of. And I've always wanted to work in a cooperative spirit between faith leaders in the state of Delaware and our government. And it's been hard to find ways of doing that. And unfortunately, COVID-19 created this really wonderful opportunity for us to really band together. I certainly support separation of church and state, or synagogue and state, as much as anybody else. But I do think we could work in cooperative ways together. And in our state of Delaware, everybody who's on my council sits as kind of like in the middle of a web. Like our people in the Islamic Society of Delaware, they can get the word out really fast. For me, I could get out to Chabad, to Reconstructionists in one click of a button. And so, be it how to stay safe during COVID-19, and how to do houses of worship in a safe way and doing worship in a safe way. And now with the vaccine, how is that all working? There's been this real cooperation. And what I'm hoping we won't lose is, after this COVID-19, please God, is in our rearview mirror, how do we behave in an interfaith effective way between our houses of worship and our government going forward to put programs together that will help the entire state, no matter what we're doing. This is affectionately known as the Delaware Way, which created hopefully a good soil for our president to implement on the national level, which is kind of a balanced approach. We're a very small state. We have to get along with all the other bigger states to our north, south, and west. And I think this cooperative spirit is really an exciting piece. And I think we're onto something here in Delaware. And I'm hoping we can take it out of COVID as well as problem solving. And to Deborah, that's going to certainly resonate. And I imagine to Maayan as well, in terms of your problem solving as well.
Who's next?
I'll offer very quickly. Personally, I've had the luxury of having our 22-year-old recent graduate of a music conservatory home since this began. So all my children are home and my house is filled with music. And I'm sometimes very nostalgic, realizing that it will come to an end for a very good reason, but I'll miss it. And I wish I could hold on to it. But I think the bigger piece is what a laser focus this past year gave me to lead with empathy. To enter any discussion or decision, conversation or relationship, policy making with empathy. And that if I can hold on to that past the crisis, I think I'll be a better public servant, a better organizer. But this year has crystallized that, and I hope engraved it in my being.
I love that, Deborah. Maayan, I'll give you the last word. And just before you go, just to, again, thank you everyone for being here. Thanks to Lisa Lepson and Dina Cooperman and Gabby Brooks for programming this and putting this together. You will get in your inbox a video and a subscription offer. I hope you'll share it with all of your friends and on your social networks. And I'm seeing some people in the chat are saying they want to make sure that we continue our Zoom events long after the pandemic ends. And I hope we'll do that as well. If you want to support the Forward's ability to do that, you can donate to us. We are a reader-supported nonprofit. with our own financial challenges. But Maayan, what are you taking with you from 2020 into the future?
Okay, well, definitely love staying inside for the winter. That's lovely. In any case, loving all the Zoom and connecting with people all over the world. I love that. And just from my standpoint of like all of the things that I've just kind of stepped into here, like being on the Zoom, for instance, just speak up. Like, I've probably lived in my head for a great amount of time. So on occasion, when I do these things, I'm like, oh my goodness, it sounded way better in there. Okay. But in any case, yeah, I would say speak up. Don't be scared to stand up. And even if you're scared, do it. It's the brave thing to do. Speak up if you know what you're doing is right to do. And that's all.
Sorry, I was on mute because my son was coming downstairs and threatening to interrupt everything. Anyway, I love that message. Certainly that's one that has lasting power that we can take with us, not just from 2020 into 2021, but well beyond that. So thank you again for being with us. Please join us for future events. Please keep reading the Forward. And Deborah, Maayan, Rabbi Beals, I hope you have a healthy and happy and meaningful and empathetic and strong 2021. Thank you for being part of this
Happy
event and
Purim,
for all
Thank
the work
you,
that you do.
too.
Thank you, Jodi. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.